Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Today, we will dive into a very exciting topic, the business impact of emotional and relational intelligence, building high-performance teams through personality insights. This session is eligible for HRCI, SHRM, and ATD professional development credits. For those of you who aren't familiar with Brennan Hall Group, we are a leading research and analyst firm with a global reach of over 10,000 clients and over 30 years of experience. We provide research-based solutions that drive organizational excellence through innovative tools and insights. Our vision is to inspire better workplace experiences, and our mission is to empower organizations around the world through our research and tools each and every day. Here is a sample of our clients. Our impact extends to over 10 million employees and executives through our comprehensive research library, strategic insights, and prestigious awards program. We also invite you, as always, to participate in our research studies. Links will be available in your handout, or you can always visit brennanhall.com. Once the results are analyzed, all participants receive a piece of complimentary research and other executive benefits. If you want to learn more about how our Excellence Awards, please visit excellenceawards.brennanhall.com. Brennan Hall Group Institute is the top research and institutes serving learning, talent, and HR leaders worldwide. For over 3 decades, we've shaped the future of human capital management by providing essential research, certification, and recognition to organizations committed to excellence. I want to give a big thank you to today's webinar sponsor, SurePeople. SurePeople is a people intelligence platform that combines behavioral science, psychometric assessments, and AI-driven tools to help organizations build stronger, more effective teams. By democratizing workplace assessments with Prism, SurePeople ensures that every employee at every level has access to the tools they need to grow, communicate better, and thrive in their roles. Now let's meet today's speakers. First, we have Claude Werder, SVP and Principal Analyst of Brennan Hall Group. We have Demetra, Chief Success Officer at SurePeople, and Roberta Gogos, Principal Analyst at Brennan Hall Group. We are excited to share that at the end of today's webinar, we will be selecting a raffle winner. Stay tuned to see if you're the lucky winner. You must be present to win. Now, just a few quick things to note. If you have any questions during the webinar, please use the questions panel on your control bar. We'll be answering them throughout the session. We're also recording today's webinar, and you'll receive an email within 24 hours with a link to the recording and a PDF of the slides. The chat box is open, so feel free to share your thoughts as we go along. Your input makes this more valuable for everyone. Now I would like to pass things off to Roberta.
Thanks so much, Ivy, and thank you everyone for joining us today for this conversation. Before we dive in, I'd love to kick things off by hearing from Demetra and Claude on their thoughts. Claude, what excites you about today's conversation around emotional intelligence and assessment?
Well, a couple of things. One is it's the first time I've been asked not to talk about AI for 60 minutes, so that's always good. There's an AI connection to EI, but EI is something I think is just incredibly important. It's a foundational skill that is really, to me, absolutely essential to succeed in today's world as we move and evolve in this era of AI. And I think also the connection between emotional intelligence and understanding the degrees that people have of emotional intelligence and how to develop their emotional intelligence through the use of psychometric assessment. So I think this is a conversation we should be having a lot more often, quite honestly, and I'm excited to be here.
Great. And Demetra, from your perspective, why is this topic particularly relevant right now for organizations?
It's interesting, thank you. So good to be with everyone. And thank you, Roberta and Claude, for being just fantastic partners in this little journey we've been on together. I think that for me, psychometrics, what I'm most excited about is this idea of psychometrics as a valuable viable, valid data set to be used to really get underneath what's happening on the people side of the enterprise, which I think is still quite opaque for many of us who have been in the field for a long time. And we've been rattling around with these issues, trying to get a hold of how do we become more predictive and prescriptive when we're looking at data? How do we really understand how to optimize the workforce and mitigate, issues of engagement and turnover and all of the challenges that we know are out there? And I think psychometrics are one of those data sets that's sort of been sitting under our noses the whole time and not utilized as effectively. So I'm excited to open the discussion, get feedback and input from the group as well, and see what people's thoughts are on this.
Thanks so much, Demetra. Great insights. So let's take a look to kick off at what emotional intelligence actually entails before we explore how organizations can better leverage it. So Claude, could you walk us through, please, what we mean by emotional intelligence and why it's become such a critical skill in today's workplace?
Yeah, I think it's a foundational skill. Technical skills are all the rage. People are really focused on all the technical skills that are needed in today's world. But the foundation to me is emotional intelligence. You can be great at a technical skill, but you can't be as successful as you could be, no matter how skillful you are in some of the technical skills, without the type of emotional intelligence, the ability to effectively communicate, the ability to have empathy for others, to connect with your colleagues, connect with your boss, connect with your customers, be self-aware of your strengths and perhaps your weaknesses, to be able to control yourself and self-regulate in different and difficult situations. And I think probably a skill that's not talked about enough is resilience. We all wherever we're employed go through ups and downs, changes in the economy, changes in our business. And so it's one of those things that most organizations now think are very important, but they sometimes struggle in terms of how to develop emotional intelligence. I mean, even since Daniel Goleman, a psychologist, made this a popular concept in the 1990s. There's been a little bit of tug of war between people who think that emotional intelligence is more of an innate skill that's difficult to develop, and those of us, like myself and probably Demetra, who believe that can definitely be developed. And there's a lot of different ways, and I think now better ways through assessments and other tools to develop emotional intelligence. So it's a variety of different types of skills that you pull together as a foundation really for everything that you do.
And we've got this 86% stat here of organizations believing AI is a critical skill. Beyond that, what are you actually seeing in terms of investment in developing these skills, Claude?
Well, I think people are becoming more aware that those skills really need to develop. But I think one of the issues is they don't always know how to go about it. And that's why the assessments are so important. They can, and Demetra can go more into this, but it gives you a real barometer of where someone is with their skills and then how to develop them. And I think there's also a tug of war between, and I hear this talking to organizations in my research all the time, is there's so much focus by the business on technical skills that sometimes the human skills that are important to differentiate humans from AI in this highly technical world sometimes get overshadowed a little bit. And it's because it's harder to get your hands around the types of skills that need to be developed with emotional intelligence. So I think the investment is increasing, but I still think there's a tug of war. One of our research studies shows that the 86% think it's critical, but when you ask them what, the types of skills that are actually being developed, it's toward the bottom. So they think it's important, but all the other things tend to rise above it. There's a lot of conflicting priorities. And so I don't think it gets as much attention as it deserves.
Just to build a little bit on what you're saying, Claude, on that, if I could, I'm sorry,
Sure.
Roberta.
Go for it.
I think that it's also, again, like to our point, quite opaque. like the way
Mm.
people don't know quite what to do, what to use, how to grasp it, how to organize the information. It's not democratized, it's held, we'll speak to that a little bit later, but I think we've sort of created some self-inflicted barriers as well that that hopefully tech can open up, right, and sort of release the information to the world. And then the challenge becomes, well, okay, what type of information are we releasing and how comfortable are we with that? But I think that hopefully we'll be able to quell people's anxiety about releasing this type of information and see the greater good around it.
Thank you for sharing that. Let's look at emotional intelligence in action then. So this, I really like this slide. It really brings to life how emotional intelligence manifests in different contexts. Claude, I'm curious, how do you see these EI skills playing out differently across leadership, collaboration, and customer service contexts?
Yeah, like any skill, EI skills are, I think, leveraged somewhat differently in different contexts, as you say. But I think the great thing about emotional intelligence and all the elements of emotional intelligence is that it's easily adapted and applied to any situation. We have fostering trust under leadership, but you also need to foster trust in a customer service relationship or a sales relationship or in real life, outside of work. You have to navigate change effectively as a leader, but you also have to do that in every other work context as well as your personal life. So I think they're really adaptable and absolutely essential to all the things that we do every day. You can't foster trust and inspire teams if you're not self-aware and empathetic. If you're a poor communicator, you can't control the narrative and how do you talk and manage relationships with your peers and your team and your supervisors. You can't navigate change if you're not resilient and agile and be able to adapt to new situations. So all the skills kind of blend together and are I've said it before, I'm repeating myself already and we're only a few minutes in, but it's a foundational it's a foundational skill that I think is essential.
Thanks, Claude. And Demetra, from your experience working with clients, which of these areas do you find organizations struggle with most when it comes to EI?
Collaboration. I think, team dynamics, being able to diagnose team dynamics, being able to have that relational and team intelligence piece that we'll speak to a little bit. I think people know themselves quite well. A lot of people, especially in leadership roles, have had executive coaches or, experienced various 360s or different types of assessments over the years. I don't think I've met anybody, who hasn't done a Myers-Briggs or a DISC or something like that. But that collaboration piece to me is like the ocean we're all swimming in, and people really struggle with, okay, how do we go meta in a collaborative process and really understand what's happening at the group level, what's getting in our way, what's driving us forward. You sort of, it's like when you're swimming in the ocean, like, can you see to the bottom, or is it cloudy? And, we're all swimming together, but are there sharks or dolphins around me? I don't know, right? So I think for me, that's where I think the biggest leverage point is in organizational life.
Well, and to your point, the dimensions are ever expanding. Right now we have hybrid work, we have in-person work, we have remote work, we're working across nationalities. We have people, Roberta is outside the United States, although you wouldn't know it, we're all connected here, but there are still differences that you need nuanced communication and collaboration skills in order to navigate.
Totally.
So true. All right. So as we've just discussed, emotional intelligence is critical. Now let's explore how assessments can serve as a toolkit for developing a deeper understanding of these skills, both in ourselves and in our teams. So we have a poll, I believe, about current approaches and personality assessments. So let's get that out there. Let's get a sense of where everyone is in their assessment journey. So which of the following best describes your organization's current approach to personality or behavioral assessments? Please take a moment.
Okay,
Right.
this is interesting.
Let's look at the results then. So we have, let's see, end there and get the results, please, Ivy. So we have 40% use assessments for hiring and occasional team development. 30% don't currently use any. Also, yeah, 30% don't currently use any. 15% have integrated insights into team management processes. And only 5% we use assessments for hiring selection only. Not sure, 10%. Claude, what are your reaction to these? Or Demetra, are they in line with what you typically see?
Unfortunately, yes. When we first started doing studies on assessments, they asked these questions, and I've been with Brandon Hall Group a long time ago. I think a long time now. The first one we did was in 2014, and we had about 39% of people who've never used assessments, and 10 years later, it's 30%. So the progress that we're making in terms of getting people to truly understand the value of assessments and how to use them, I don't think the progress is nearly what it should be. And one of the reasons why I think we need to talk about this more. The key to assessments, I think, is having those integrated insights into team management processes and other parts of the organization, and being able to understand what people's strengths and growth areas are. And if only 15%, if this were, the full population that we were surveying, if only 15% of organizations have that kind of insight, it's difficult for organizations to really get the most out of its workforce. And so that's what jumps out at me.
And Demetra, does anything surprise you about these results based on your work with organizations?
I guess I'm a little surprised that it was so low, because I do know that the world of assessments is growing, right? But I think that there's a convergence of awareness about the value, and I also think there's some generational stuff, right? Like a lot of younger generations are interested in personalized development, self-awareness. There's a lot of sort of, what's my role in this world? What's my purpose? I want to have a purpose-driven existence. I think people may be more open. I guess from my background, where I spent most of my career in leadership development, yeah, Gen Z, McKenna, is, they're pretty prevalent. What I think, where I see the huge gap is this inability to scale, right? I remember I was in a conversation with a customer years ago. They had 70,000 people who they considered were high professionals, Fortune 100 company. Your marketing people, your salespeople, like all these people who weren't in high potential programs or at the top of the house, but they were that next layer down. And they got nothing. And I asked why, and they said, because it's just too hard to scale. It's too expensive. It's too hard to scale it. And so they get nothing. So my sense is there's maybe, when we kind of pick up the hood on that, it's a little more complex in terms of the dynamics of why they might not be utilized, but it'll be fun to hear what people have to say about that over the course of this discussion.
Yeah. And please, everyone, if you have any questions as we go along, feel free to just drop them in the chat, because we have a dedicated time at the end of this session to answer them, but also we may just pick them up during. So just get your questions in if you have any as we go along. Now let's transition to talking about assessments as a toolkit for developing EI. Claude, over to you.
Oh, sorry, I'm having trouble with my computer. There we go. So these are the top 5 drivers of assessment use, and you can see the adoption rate is only 36%. I just want to talk a little bit to just promote assessment. I'm a big fan, right? If I were hiring, I wouldn't hire anyone or look to promote anybody without having an assessment. It's a real insight, and it's a great way to evaluate people. But the thing I want to talk about a little bit before we drill in anymore is what I think is really overlooked when organizations consider assessments is the value they have to build relationships. Whether the person is a job candidate or a current employee, offering assessments provides the person who's taking the assessment an opportunity to share information about themselves and an opportunity for the hiring manager, supervisor, or whoever is going to look at it to gather insights and get a greater understanding of that individual. So it's not so much about evaluating, but creating understanding, creating a level playing field where you can really have a deeper understanding. You know, we do interviews for jobs and we do interviews for promotions and we talk about people's work, but we don't always have a deeper understanding about where they're coming from and what drives them. And psychometric assessments can provide a lot of insights. We can talk about this a little later, but also a lot of data as you go on to be able to understand your workforce and what you need to do to develop it by gathering data and insights from people on a consistent and strategic basis. And so that's the big thing that I think make them important. In terms of the drivers of use based on our research, these are the 4 or 5 things that are most important, right? Or that people tend to use assessments for: assessing development needs, improving top-line performance, assessing future leadership potential, predicting job performance, determining fit between the employee and the organization. But what I've seen in the interviews that we do is these are often used not as regularly and strategically and consistently as they should be. And so you get an uneven understanding of the people that you work with or who may work for you. I'm consulting with a company right now where they have an assessment that everybody is supposed to take. It's a psychometric assessment, but some people, some departments don't really believe in them, so they basically put them in a file drawer. So they're
Right.
all online, but you know, metaphorically speaking, put them in a file drawer, just put them away. While others are making those decisions almost entirely through the assessment. And one department I'm working with in this organization actually, and I don't recommend this, actually only allows one interview for each candidate. And then they look at the assessment and they make a decision, boom, like that. So that's not good either. So we'll get more into this, but I think having a strategy and a consistent approach to using assessments is really critical.
It's so funny.
Go ahead, Demetra.
I was just going to say, it's so funny what you said, because literally I wrote down as you were speaking, speed to relationship in a non-relational world, you know, that it's this whole idea of we just don't know each other very well anymore, and teams are thrown together, you know, I mean, you're working globally, remotely, hybrid, whatever, and it's just you know, it's the thing that can get groups of people stuck in storming, you know, norming idea in these like endless cycles of stuff, and it's because we're all, you know, making the wrong assumptions about each other, because it's impossible to really know who someone is at their core.
Interesting. I'd love to dive into the barriers to having a formal assessment strategy now. So these that you see up on the screen certainly resonate with what we hear from our research. Demetra, what common misconceptions do you encounter about personality assessments when working with clients?
I think it's like, for me, it's 1, 3, and 5, which is, you know, sort of this, you have to attach it to something. You can't just throw this information out into an organization and hope for the best, you know? So for me, where I've found them to be the most successful is when there's a value system in an organization that says we want openness and transparency, or we want people to be able to have autonomy and agency in their own ability to build relationships and get to know each other. We want to create a collaborative kind of non-judgmental environment, and how do we help people evolve their thinking around that? The lack of the full understanding of the business value, I think there, there's a big disconnect, right? I mean, we all know the statistics about what it costs to replace people, and so I think part of it is not really, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but like we have them stuck in a file folder in our heads about what is the value and use of this type of information, and we don't link it to actual stuff happening in the business, right? So then
Mm-hmm.
business case for it that's justifiable or strong enough. And then the item 5 for me is really this lack of interest and priority among executives. I don't know. I mean, I think typically executives who receive a lot of assessments and coaches and stuff, I think part of their resistance is not that they don't think the information is valuable, but they don't think it's scalable. They don't understand how it can be utilized because it's so white glove in the way we deliver it at the top of the house that many of them can't envision the possibility or potential of this information being utilized en masse, in an organization. And so I do think it's often positioned, and it's where we have this like HR, L&D, and OD kind of collusion, I think a little bit. And yeah, of course you get a ton of value if you have an executive coach and somebody debriefing you and walking you through all the data. But does everybody really need that level of intensity in order to just up their game? Like, I think of it as not perfection. We used to call it in my world practitioner perfection, but successive approximation. How do we put information and tools in the hands of grown-ups? Because we're not employing children, we're employing grown-ups. And so we need, in my opinions, to stop infantilizing people and give them information in particular about themselves. Right?
Yeah.
So speak to that too. The value of the self-assessment, I think, is way higher further down the system than the value of 60s and other cross-organizational or cross-peer assessments.
I love your perspective. It just sounds like there's a real disconnect between having the tool and knowing how to use it effectively. And Claude, I was about to ask you your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so to Demetra's point about not knowing whether executives really prioritize it, I think most executives actually do, in my experience. I think it's the managers below them that sometimes do the file drawer kind of thing. And one of the things, it's a little unpopular to say, but I'll just say it anyway, that it always blows my mind how many recruiters and hiring managers have this uncanny confidence about their intuitive ability to evaluate people. I hear all the time as well, I'm an intuitive hirer. I'm an intuitive manager. I know when somebody's ready. I know what people's strengths are. I work with them every day. But the data would not agree. The 1 out of every 3 promotions ends up being a failure. 1 out of 3 hires is often characterized as a bad hire. So we're not as good as we think we are in making people decisions. And there's a simple reason for that. No matter how experienced you are, I've been hiring for close to 40 years, but I would never trust myself to hire somebody without some other type of tool to help me make a decision, because I come, no matter how hard I try, I come with inherent biases. We all do. And so even if you're a person who may doubt the science behind assessments a little bit, or think you have a handle on how to hire the best people, why would you turn down an additional opportunity for insight? That's what it comes down to for me. And I think one of the reasons, besides this kind of uncanny confidence about intuition, is they do have a lot of different priorities. And they do, and it not only for hiring, but for developing people. Sometimes you have to plug somebody into a position right away. Somebody's just walked away from the job, and they don't necessarily go through all the steps they need to do to maybe make the best choices. We all need to deal with difficult situations, but I think there's a lot of things at play that work against assessments. And so we'll get into this a little bit more, but you have to get a handle on a real strategy and get the organization or the key stakeholders in the organization on board with the idea that we've got to do this and we have to do it consistently.
Thank you, Claude. I think that's a great segue into talking about the assessment framework and how we can, a successful assessment implementation. Thanks. So this is this gives a really comprehensive view of what's needed for a successful assessment implementation. Claude, you mentioned earlier, I can't remember if it was in this webinar or earlier today when we chatted, that alignment and transparency are the biggest issues in assessment implementation. Could you elaborate on why these two top levels are so critical?
Yeah, so, to Demetra's earlier point, we have great tools, great technology now to deploy the assessments and to analyze the data. But it's what we do until we get to that point that I think can undermine assessments. You really have to have alignment. You have to have stakeholders at all levels who understand their value, understand how they're going to be used, why they're going to be used, and how they're going to balance with other tools they have for evaluating talent. And I think one of the things I know that I created a problem when I started using assessments years and years ago was not spending enough time from the employee's point of view of them understanding the value. Some people felt, and this was like 20, 25 years ago now, where assessments were relatively new, not completely new, but not everybody used them. And they kind of felt like they were being psychoanalyzed, right? But when you explained it to them and why they were doing it, and that it was a way to better know them and for them to kind of express themselves through and give us a better picture of who they really are through these assessments, I found that there were very, very little resistance for the most part to the assessment. So when we talk about educating and bringing stakeholders on board, it's really at every level of the organization. And that's not an easy thing to do, right? From the very high leadership area to HR, to recruiters, to hiring managers, to employees and job candidates, and anybody involved directly or indirectly in the hiring process. You've got to have that alignment and understanding of how the assessments are going to be used and why we use them. And as Donna in our chat pointed out, it's not just about hiring, it's about development, career development, succession planning. It can be used in a lot of different ways, but everybody has to understand that, and everybody needs to be communicating on that for it to be successful. And that's not an easy thing to do, especially in large, distributed workforces and organizations.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add. I think you're totally said it. There has to be a container, that's created by leadership in the organization.
Yeah, the one thing I guess I did forget to mention also was, and I guess it was kind of implied, but the core values is that the core values of the organization really need to be understood, and how using assessments relates to those core values. I think that's the other thing. And for that matter, not to get off on a tangent or anything, I'm finding more organizations are trying to understand now and try to do a better job in communicating core values across the organization, because we're all dispersed now. There's different ways of working, and the core values kind of get lost. So that's another reason that I think this is a struggle for some organizations, is all the things I said before, but they're also not necessarily aligned on the core values of the organization. And if they were, most organizations are talking about team development, right? People development, developing the whole person, connecting people with one another. All those things can be evaluated and through the use of psychometric assessments. But if all that stuff isn't woven together, it's kind of hard to go there.
Right. Let's have a look at some critical questions. these really get to the heart of creating a strategic approach the strategic approach that Claude and Demetra are talking about. So I'd love to hear from both of you. Which of these questions do you find organizations struggle with? You've addressed that a little, Claude. Do you have any specific examples or anecdotes you could share?
Demetra, you want to go first on the questions? I've been chatting up a storm here.
Well, I think I'm gonna probably address a lot of these later when I go through some of the slides that I've prepared. But I do think that this idea of governance is really critical, and not to put too heavy a hand on it at all, but to just say, here are the ground rules for how this data is going to be utilized, an ethical stance around, this is not information to be weaponized against people. It's about talent optimization and self-development and group development and organizational development, and providing insights for people to improve their relationships, increase collaboration and synergy. And I think for me, that's the biggest thing, that once that's established and clear, then suddenly people feel a tremendous sense of relief about what to do with the information. So I see that as one of the big root cause pluses or challenges.
Thanks,
Demetra. Yeah, it's hard for me to say one or two. I think they kind of go together. I would tend to think the governance is one, and also the interview strategies, as well as understanding really what you're looking for. I'll give you a quick, as for an anecdote, I'll give you a quick one where I think assessments are so important. So, company I worked with used a series of assessments to hire a revenue cycle director. And they found somebody who did really fit the things they were looking for in terms of their experience and their behaviors and their style, except that the candidate did not have experience with the primary software. They used another software, which was actually a higher end software, but the person didn't have experience with that specific software. The hiring manager wasn't concerned about that, but the senior vice president overruled him, and they hired a candidate who didn't really have any of the experience that the other candidate had, but had crackerjack skills on this type of software. So they hired that person who didn't make it through the 90-day probation. They reached back out to the other candidate who, guess what, was hired already by their direct competitor, their top competitor. And so key position was vacant for a prolonged period of time. The revenue cycle function suffered, obviously. The main competitor took the better candidate, and now they have a distinct advantage. So a lot of really not so good stuff happened there that could have been eliminated if there had been alignment, right, between the different management levels on how to hire, what the key qualities they were looking for the hire, and using the right tools to evaluate.
Thanks for sharing that, Claude. So, I mean, you both seem to be pointing to the gap between priorities and assessment utilization, or the real disconnect there. I think if we can move to the next slide just quickly. Organizations say they want better alignment, employee engagement, succession planning, but don't prioritize assessments at the same level. Demetra, how do you explain this gap between priorities and utilization from your point of view?
I mean, I think we've been talking about it. So again, one of the big observations I've had is really this idea of people don't know how to use the data. They don't know how to make distinctions between the data. They don't know how to scale it. These kinds of instruments have not typically been designed to be easily scalable from an analytics perspective, right? It's been sort of, we're going to use it as a team building thing, or sort of a kumbaya exercise to get people to know each other, and then it gets put in a desk drawer. And so I think that the the disconnect is, we're looking for something to help us, and how can we make this work? So that's what we're trying to crack the code on too. So, hey, everybody, we're all in this together. So we can, keep talking about that. But to me, that's I think one of the root.
Right. And I think I mean, in your slides that are upcoming, we'll be talking about, what you've seen work well in closing this gap. So poll question number 2, let's check in with our audience again. What are your biggest challenges in translating personality insights into tangible business outcomes? While we're waiting for a response, it'd be great to ask the audience to share in the chat. What are some reasons why assessment data sometimes gets stuck in a file folder and not fully utilized in your organization?
It's interesting.
How are we going, Ivy?
Interesting once the answers come in.
Yeah.
It looks like it's a little bit of everything.
Go ahead, Claude. A little bit of everything.
Sustaining and linking development to the assessment, that's the number one. Yeah, that's it right there.
All right. This is a really good segue into Demetra's section, where we'll explore how to reframe the use of psychometric assessments to address these exact challenges.
Right. So, I mean, I've been saying this sort of throughout, the discussion, but really, I think the baseline thing, one of the things we've observed is people are confused about the uses and applications of different types of instruments, right? So at a really basic level, this isn't going to be rocket science for anyone, but just to create clarity, surveys, right? So everybody does surveys. What do surveys measure? They're descriptive. What's happening right now in the organization around a particular set of issues and needs? We're taking a snapshot, right? And timing is everything with surveys. But they're meant to highlight sort of broad swath organizational themes. So the way I think often about surveys is like, it's sort of a compass pointing you in the right direction. Oh, this group or this team or this business unit. Multi-raters, right? We've been in 360 everything, everywhere. Multi-rater assessments have been around for a long time, all of these things. But what does a multi-rater really do? A multi-rater, a 360 assessment, it's kind of in the middle. It's descriptive and it's semi-predictive, right? Because what you're looking at is, what is the impact of this individual person in a particular role, in a particular context, with a particular group of people who are giving them feedback? And let's also not forget that multi-raters are assessment oriented, right? So people are making judgments about you in a multi-rater assessment. They're telling you what their perception of you is. Where it's semi-predictive is it can highlight themes, right? So you can start to see, oh, okay, I'm a leader. I got a 360 from these 3 teams, and there are 2 or 3 themes that are coming across all of the feedback, and maybe that's something I need to pay attention to and think about moving forward. The one that I think is most opaque for people is this idea of psychometrics, right? So psychometrics being utilized for team and self-awareness. So again, like, people do a Myers-Briggs, a DISC, any number of, there are any number of great instruments out there, but people tend to use them at a moment in time, like for a team or group insights or for self-awareness. But then the data gets put away in a PDF in a desk drawer somewhere, and left. However, here's the opportunity with psychometrics, and this is what we're really zeroing in on. It's the most predictive of the 3 types of assessment data. Why? Because it's a self-assessment. So for me, what I love about self-assessments is it's not me telling Claude who he is. It's me revealing to the world how I'm wired as a human. And the reason that's more predictive even if I have lots of skills that I've developed over the course of my career, what it allows other people to do is say, okay, if this is who Demetra says she is, then if I go to dinner with her, I'm in a meeting with her, I'm working on a project with her, I can kind of predict how she's going to likely show up in a lot of different types of situations. And so that's what we're really leaning into, is that to me is the most benign, the most insightful, the most informative, and the most predictive data to be utilized in organizations. And I know we should probably keep moving because I'm
Okay.
time. Claude, anything you want to add to what I just said?
We can save it for the end. I want to make sure you can get through this. I'm having trouble advancing these slides. There we go.
Okay, so just a couple of examples, right? So when I think about the value at an emotional intelligence level, so when we think about emotional relational team, right? Emotional me and my own self-regulation, as Claude described, relational me plus one, team, a group dynamic. So here's an example of an executive who we were working with, who, because of the results of the psychometric and the insights that he had about himself, he was able to completely transform a situation from what he would typically do on the left, right? Deal with a crisis, had two new leaders, would swoop in, fix it, disempower them, deal with what he described as 20 to 30 hours of relationship fallout and repair afterwards. Once he had insight because of his psychometric into how he was wired and what his strengths and blind spots were, he actually started to experiment with different approaches that he had never even considered before. So I said, well, it'd be great to find out the ROI on that, right? And so he said, well, I just decided to do an experiment. I could always fall back to my old way. But instead I facilitated, coached, empowered these new leaders to problem solve. I gave them some guidance. I spent 2 hours and I saved 18 to 28 hours of my time. And I can't believe it actually worked. And I can't believe it was because I was managing myself. So to me, it's not about huge transformational moments. It's about those micro moments and insights that we get by revealing through an instrument how we're wired. We're just being ourselves, right? So we're not always aware of the impact we're having on others just by virtue of being who we are. So maybe
Well, and doing
Yes.
what he did has an exponential impact too. Not only because it's also changing the perceptions of the people that he's been micromanaging up until now. Like, wait, something's changing.
Right.
And so that's how you can move forward in an organization. Is somebody gets insights on their behavior, they tried something different, and the people go, aha, something's changing, and then things can happen.
Exactly. So
Powerful
that
example.
got it. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, so what
No,
we
I just, it's powerful.
I mean, it's powerful in the one-on-one. So that's like a one-on-one example, right? Where you have sort of a relational. Now we can say, okay, well, hey, everyone, what if we were able to aggregate this data and scale it up at an enterprise level? And so this example I want to share is a really interesting example where we were working with a major hospital system, and they had just done a, Press Ganey survey, their annual sort of engagement survey. And there was a bell curve. And the tier one leaders were the leaders who scored 52% above the national average for healthcare leadership. And the tier three leaders in the organization scored 36% below the national average, right? So they were the low performing or the low scoring leaders in that system. And what emerged was that 15% of the organization reported to the low scoring leaders. And the chief operating officer and the chief administrative officer looked at that and said, oh my God, we could have a turnover crisis on our hands. What do we do? Well, it so happened that we had the psychometric data on both groups of leaders. And so what we were able to do was aggregate that data and do a comparison just as an experiment. And what emerged was really profound in terms of accelerating the cycle time that it took them to go from data to insights to action at a systemic level, right? So what you see here is just one module of what we offer in the PRISM portrait, which I'll speak to in a little bit. But you can see that your tier 3, who are the low performing leaders, right, scored incredibly high on power and precision in their personality, right? So how they project to the world versus the high performing leaders who were way more balanced across power, versatility, amiability, and precision, with versatility being the highest. Versatility is people driven, big picture, and people driven, right? So these are your charismatic relational leaders who are very good at engaging stakeholders. That insight was mind-blowing to them. I'll tell you why in a minute. If we could go to the next slide, which builds on this. I'm just showing 2 modules of this. But the next slide, which is processing dimensions.
All right, I'm having trouble with this. I'll get there.
Okay. For both groups of leaders were that, again, this discrepancy was validated in the psychometrics relative to the survey data, right? So what you see here are 4 scales in processing, 8 dimensions, which this is akin to, you know, the Jungian research that Myers-Briggs is also based on. But where I have the 2 arrows here that you can see is around logic and emotion. So what you see is a big difference in the balance or lack of balance between logic and emotion and processing, right? So your low performing leaders were low on emotion, high on logic, emotion, empathy, you know, caring about the impact on people. Whereas your high performing leaders were way more balanced.
Oops, sorry.
So that comparison, that's okay, you can leave it here, but that
Okay.
comparison of, oh, that's why in the survey comments, we're seeing all of these comments about my boss takes work away from me when it's not perfect. Yeah, because they're powerful and precise. And under pressure, they actually increase those dimensions. Oh,
Right.
that's why we're seeing comments about people don't coach and develop me. Right, don't take one-on-one time. Yeah, because they're really low in amiability, which is about one-on-one relationships. So this is just, I think, in helping to reframe and think about the value of psychometrics, this is a real opportunity when you have this information to connect it to other types of data that you're looking at to say, can it help answer root cause? And then what are some prescriptions we can put in place? So just to wrap this up, and then I want to, you know, open it up because I'm just aware of the time. So this is what we offer at SurePeople, which is the Prism Portrait. It covers 6 key dimensions. You'd really have to take 6 or 7 different instruments to get the same data set that is provided. We own it. It's proprietary to us. It's a fully valid instrument. And we measure personality and personality under pressure, processing, how you take in information, decision making, how do you communicate and what's the speed with which you make decisions, conflict management, motivation, and core fundamental needs, which to me is really the kind of piece de resistance. So if you think about this as a journey from your projection of self to the outer world, personality, all the way to your limbic system, right? Your inner emotional core, what drives you. And what this allows people to do, because it's situated inside a technology platform that we have, is it accounts for nuance, it accounts for paradox, and it allows people to say, okay, here's the story of me. And then here is my ability to now, with a mobile device on my computer, whatever it is, have access to the data and information so that I can self-manage and manage my relationships collaboratively, situationally, right? Because sometimes it's not processing that's the problem. Sometimes it's my fundamental needs are getting triggered. So what we've done, go to the next slide if you can, is really created this idea of, if we think of the psychometric data, the Prism Portrait, as the data set that powers tools, right? We're now using AI and technology to actually make this information democratized inside organizations, put it into people's hands. After all, guess what, everybody? It's a self-assessment. So
Right.
again, it's me revealing to the world who I am. So people are living with you and experiencing you every day, anyway, right? So my argument about it, thank you, Donna, for commenting throughout this session. Your insights are great. Is like, you know, wouldn't you rather that they had a little more insight and a little more data and a little more information? So on the left, what you see is the prism portrait for me, but then we have the ability to have you can look at it from a team perspective, so you can see dominant traits and attributes on a team. You can look, we have tools that put you side by side that allow you to think about your one-on-ones, think about how you're going to communicate better with people. And then we've linked the PRISM algorithm. We have a patent on this that links the PRISM algorithm to Harvard Business Publishing content and skills, right? So it immediately feeds people every single day content and tools and information that's personal to them. So think of it as personalized learning at scale or personalized development at scale. So I'd say
Thanks,
that's in a
Demetra.
nutshell, yeah, what we're trying to do.
And then if
Awesome.
people are interested in Prism,
Yes, sorry, thank you. So obviously anyone who attended the session today, we're happy to provide the Prism gratis for all of you if you want to try it out. And you could just put your email in the chat and we'll follow up with you, and we'll obviously be sending follow-up communications out to the group as well. But would love to have you all try it, see what we're doing, and hopefully, you know, helping us co-create on this journey of kind of reframing how we think about this type of information and the value of it.
Awesome. You would have seen on your screens a quick poll pop up about what you've learned today and what would be valuable for your organization. So that'll just stay up for a minute or so. We didn't leave a lot of time for questions, but if you do have questions, please pop them in the chat. If they come in right at the end, then the fantastic team from SurePeople will make sure that they get back to you post-webinar. So here we've got some results.
Yeah.
Again,
Practical applications for daily workflow and team interactions. There it is right there. You know, if you have a team and you have 15 PDF files, you're not going to spend the time to sit and analyze that data.
right?
But if you have a technology platform that can do it for you in a nanosecond and give you the headlines on everything. Oh, team number, you know, I'm a leader, I'm leading 5 teams, and the team A is highly precise and powerful. Team B is highly relational and big picture, right? Or think of it from an L&D perspective. We're running a leadership development program, same content, but imagine you have all the data on those cohorts before you even step in and you say, oh, cohort A, we're going to dial up module 2 because they need more work in this area. And we're going to dial down module 3 for cohort B because they need more work in a different area. Right. And so it really gets at this, what I see, because that's the world I come from. You know, in L&D, my biggest pain point was it felt too generic. It didn't feel personalized. It was very difficult to get data aggregated fast enough to be able to personalize the experience for people and still create consistency and scale. So that's the code we're trying to crack collectively.
Fantastic stuff. I feel like we need a part 2 to this webinar. All right, we're at time, and I want to thank you both for your insights today. It's been super valuable, and everybody's loved this based on comments. I just wanted to hand it over to Ivy because we will have a winner for the raffle.
Thank you, Roberta, Claude, and Demetra. I'm excited to announce the winner of today's raffle winning a free Excellence in Action program submission is Heather Lind. Congratulations, Heather. We will be reaching out shortly with more information.
Great.
All right.
Congratulations. Yay. Thank you, everyone, for staying on. You've been a wonderful, wonderful audience. Demetra and Claude, thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you. It's been great. Thank you, Demetra, for such a great conversation.
Thanks, Claude. Appreciate it. Take care, Roberta, and everyone.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.